The whisper was colder than the draft, sneaking under my bedroom door. It slithered into the quiet air of our Cincinnati home, a venomous promise that coiled around my heart and squeezed. "It's my turn now," he said at my brother, Tyler, his face illuminated by the sliver of light from the hallway. He was 14. I was 12. The words didn't make sense until they did. Until they connected the dots of our family's silent, suffocating history. He was echoing something ancient and rotten that lived in the bones of our house. Something that started with our grandfather. In that moment, standing in the doorway of my childhood bedroom, Tyler wasn't just my brother anymore. He was the inheritor of a legacy of cruelty, and I was the next piece of property to be claimed. My mother, Nancy, the keeper of our family's secrets and the architect of our silence, was downstairs, probably polishing silver that didn't need polishing, pretending our lives were as shiny as the cutlery. They thought I was weak, that the generational trauma that flowed through our veins would paralyze me as it had paralyzed my mother. They didn't know that fear, when compressed tightly enough, turns into something hard and sharp. They didn't know that the little girl frozen in her bed wasn't just scared. She was planning, and she would spend the next decade meticulously plotting the demolition of the dynasty they thought they were building on her broken back. Our house in Cincinnati was a masterclass in deception. From the outside, it was perfect. A tidy brick colonial, with blooming hydrangea bushes, and a freshly painted porch. Inside, it was a museum of unspoken horrors. The air was always thick with a tension you could taste, a constant, low-frequency hum of anxiety. We were a family that worshipped at the altar of appearances, and my mother, Nancy, was the high priestess. Her life was dedicated to maintaining the illusion of perfection, a performance she conducted with a brittle smile and an iron will. My grandfather, her father, was the dark god of our family. He had died before I was born, but his shadow lingered in every room. He was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. A patriarch, a provider, but I had seen the way my mother flinched when his name was mentioned. I had seen the tightness around her eyes when she looked at his portrait that hung in the dining room. It wasn't until I was older that I understood what that look meant. It wasn't grief. It was fear. My grandfather had been a monster, and my mother had been his favorite victim. She never spoke of it directly. Of course, we didn't speak of ugly things in our family, but the trauma leaked out in small, telling ways. Her obsession with control, her aversion to any kind of physical affection, the way she would freeze if Tyler raised his voice too loudly. She had survived her own horror story, but instead of breaking the cycle, she had become its custodian. She had learned to equate silence with safety, denial with strength, and she demanded the same sacrifice from me. Tyler, my older brother, was the golden child, the heir apparent to a throne built on secrets and silence. He was handsome, charismatic, and possessed a chilling ability to charm the outside world, while reserving his cruelty for those behind closed doors. He was my grandfather reborn, and my mother adored him. His every fault was excused, his every whim indulged. He was the prince, and I was the servant girl, existing only to admire his light and clean up his mess. I learned early on that my role in the family was to be small, quiet, and accommodating. My feelings were an inconvenience, my needs a burden. I was the keeper of the peace, the smoother of edges, the one who absorbed the tension so that the facade of our perfect family could remain intact. I didn't know it then, but I was being groomed for a lifetime of silent suffering, a sacrifice at the altar of a legacy I never asked for and didn't understand. The legacy of my grandfather's abuse was not a story told in words, but a silent language spoken in the tense set of my mother's shoulders and the hollow look in her eyes. It was a ghost that haunted our home, a presence I felt long before I understood what it meant. I learned the truth in fragments, in whispered conversations between my mother and her sister that stopped abruptly when I entered the room, in the way my grandmother, who lived in Seattle and rarely visited, would look at my mother with a mixture of pity and frustration. My grandfather had been a tyrant, a man who ruled his home with a volatile mix of charm and violence. He had broken my grandmother's spirit and my mother's childhood, leaving behind a legacy of fear and shame that seeped into the very foundation of our lives. My mother, Nancy, had survived by becoming a master of denial. She had learned to polish the surface of her life until it gleamed, hoping the brightness would blind everyone to the rot underneath. She married a man who was kind but weak, a man who preferred to look away rather than confront the darkness in his wife's past, or the darkness growing in his son. And when Tyler began to show signs of the same cruel, entitled arrogance that had defined my grandfather, my mother didn't see a monster in the making. She saw a strong, confident boy who was destined for greatness. She excused his behavior, polished his imperfections, and sacrificed me on the altar of his golden childhood. Tyler's cruelty began subtly. He would accidentally break my favorite toys, and then laugh when I cried. He would mock my clothes, my interests, my very existence. He was a master of the psychological warfare that children inflict on each other. But in our house, his tactics were amplified by my mother's unwavering support. "He's just teasing, Margaret," she would say with a dismissive wave of her hand. "You're too sensitive." As we got older, his cruelty became sharper, more personal. He seemed to delight in my fear, in my constant attempts to placate him. He was a predator playing with his food, testing the limits of his power, honing his skills for the ultimate act of dominance. I remember one evening, when I was about 11, we were having dinner. It was my mother's famous meatloaf, a dish that was usually a symbol of comfort and family. Tyler, for no apparent reason, started mimicking me, mocking the way I held my fork, the way I chewed my food. I tried to ignore him, keeping my eyes fixed on my plate, but the humiliation burned in my chest. Finally, I looked up and whispered, "Stop it, Tyler." He just smirked. "Stop what, Maggie?" he taunted. "Stop being you." My mother, sitting at the head of the table, said nothing. She just continued to eat her meatloaf, her eyes fixed on a spot on the wall, her silence a tacit endorsement of his cruelty. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in my mouth, souring the comfort of the food. I was alone at that table, surrounded by my family, yet utterly isolated. I was the scapegoat, the repository for all the anger and dysfunction that flowed through our family like a poisoned river. My grandfather had started it, my mother had inherited it, and now Tyler was perfecting it. I was the latest victim in a long line of women who had been taught that their pain was insignificant, their voices a nuisance. And I was beginning to realize that if I didn't find a way to break free, the cycle would never end. The summer I turned 12 was when the simmering threat of my brother finally boiled over into something truly terrifying. The oppressive Cincinnati heat seemed to amplify the tension in our house, making the air thick and suffocating. My father was away on another business trip, and my mother was preoccupied with her garden club, leaving me and Tyler alone in the house for long, agonizing stretches of time. He was 14 now, taller, stronger, and radiating a sense of entitlement that was both infuriating and terrifying. He seemed to view my existence as a personal affront, my quietness a challenge to his dominance. The incident happened on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was in my room, reading, my only escape from the oppressive reality of our home. Tyler burst in without knocking, his face flushed, his eyes bright with a manic energy that immediately set my teeth on edge. "What are you doing in here, hiding again?" he sneered, kicking at a pile of books on my floor. "I was reading," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. "Reading?" he scoffed. "You're always reading. You think you're so smart, don't you?" "Smarter than me." He walked over to my bed and sat down, his body radiating a restless, predatory energy. "Get out, Tyler," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. He just laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Make me. He reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. I tried to pull away, but he was too strong. He pulled me towards him, his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale cigarette smoke on his breath, a smell I would come to associate with pure terror. You think you're better than me, he hissed, his eyes burning into mine. You think you're special, but you're not. You're just like Grandma. You're just like Mom, weak. And then he kissed me. It was not a kiss of affection, but of violence. It was a violation, an assertion of power, a branding. I froze, my mind reeling, the world tilting on its axis. I shoved him away, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm of panic and disgust. He stumbled back, surprised by my sudden defiance. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or fear, but it was quickly extinguished, replaced by a cold, triumphant smirk. He stood up and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the knob, and looked back at me. Grandfather did it first, he said, his voice a low, chilling whisper. It's my turn now. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the sudden ringing silence of my violated sanctuary. The words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. It's my turn now. It was not just a threat. It was a declaration of intent. It was a confirmation of the terrible legacy that flowed through our family, like a cursed inheritance. My grandfather's darkness had not died with him. It had been passed down, nurtured, and perfected in my brother, and I was his next victim. I sat on my bed, trembling, my mind a chaotic swirl of terror and confusion. I was 12 years old, and I understood, with a chilling clarity, that I was no longer safe in my own home. The fortress of my childhood had become a prison, and the monster was not hiding under my bed. He was sleeping in the room next door. I ran to my mother. It was a primal instinctual response, the cry of a wounded child seeking comfort and protection from the one person in the world who is supposed to provide it unconditionally. I found her in the kitchen, meticulously arranging a bouquet of flowers in a crystal vase, her face a serene mask of domestic tranquility. Mom, I choked out, my voice ragged with tears and terror. Tyler, he kissed me. She didn't even look up from her flower. Don't be dramatic, Margaret, she said, her voice calm and dismissive. He's your brother. It was probably just a joke. No, Mom, it wasn't a joke, I insisted, my voice rising in desperation. He said it was his turn. He said grandfather did it first. That got her attention. She froze, her hand hovering over a rose. She turned to me, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury. But the fury was not directed at Tyler, it was directed at me. What did you just say? She whispered, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. I heard him, I stammered. Before I could finish, her hand cracked across my face, a sharp, stinging blow that sent me staggering backward. Don't you ever say that about your grandfather, she screamed, her voice shaking with rage. Don't you ever spread such filthy, disgusting lies in this house. I stood there, stunned, my cheek burning, the taste of blood in my mouth. But it's true, I pleaded. He hurt me. He's hurting Monica. He is a good boy, she shrieked, her carefully constructed facade crumbling to reveal the terrified, broken woman beneath. He is a good son. You are the one who is always causing trouble. You are the one who is always lying, always trying to ruin everything. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. You provoked him, didn't you? She accused, her eyes blazing with a desperate denial. You were wearing that short skirt. You were flirting with him. You brought this on yourself. Her words were a second violation, more painful and profound than the first. She was not just refusing to believe me. She was blaming me. She was choosing her son, her perfect illusion, over her daughter's reality. She was sacrificing me to protect the lie that was her life. Go to your room, Margaret, she ordered, her voice cold and final. And I don't want to hear another word about this. If you ever repeat these lies again, I will make you regret. I turned and fled, my heart shattered, the last shred of hope I had for my mother's protection, evaporating into the toxic air of our home. I was alone, truly, utterly alone. There was no one to save me. I went to my room and locked the door, but I knew it offered no real protection. The monster was inside the house, and my mother was holding the keys. The injustice of it all was a suffocating weight. I was being punished for a crime that had been committed against me. I was being silenced for speaking the truth. I was being erased from my own story. I sat on my bed, the same bed where my innocence had been stolen, and I made a vow, a silent, solemn vow to myself. I would survive. I would not let them break me. I would find a way out of this house of horror. And one day, I would make them pay for every tear I had cried, for every bruise I had hidden, for every lie they had forced me to swallow. The terrified little girl was gone. In her place, a warrior was beginning to emerge, forged in the fires of betrayal, and armed with the cold, hard truth. The years that followed were a long, slow descent into a psychological war zone. The house in Cincinnati, once a place of perceived safety, became a landscape of constant threat. I learned to navigate it like a minefield, always aware of Tyler's presence, always calculating the risk of being alone with him. He never explicitly touched me again in that way, but he didn't have to. The threat was a constant looming shadow, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. He continued his reign of terror in subtle, more insidious ways. He would steal my homework, sabotage my school projects, spread vicious rumors about me to the few friends I tried to make. He was a master of psychological torture, and my mother was his devoted accomplice. She watched my every move, her eyes narrowed with suspicion, her voice a constant litany of criticism and complaint. "You're too quiet, Margaret. You're too sullen. Why can't you be more like your brother?" My sister Monica was my only ally, but she was drowning in her own sea of despair. She had become a wraith, a hollowed-out shell of the vibrant girl she used to be. We would exchange furtive glances in the hallway, silent messages of shared suffering, but we rarely spoke of the horror that bound us. To speak of it was to make it real, and reality was a luxury we couldn't afford. My escape became my obsession. I poured all of my energy into my studies, seeing education as my only ticket out of this prison. I studied late into the night, my bedroom door barricaded with my dresser, the small micro-cassette recorder Miss Gable had given me hidden under my mattress, always ready to capture the next threat, the next admission of guilt. Mrs. Gable remained my secret lifeline, my shadow general. We would meet at the library, exchanging notes and whispered strategy. She was gathering her own evidence, documenting my mother's neglect, my brother's escalating cruelty. She was building a case, brick by meticulous brick. The plan was to wait until I was 18, until I was legally an adult, and could leave without fear of being dragged back. But as I approached my 18th birthday, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Tyler, now a hulking young man of 20, became more brazen, his gaze more predatory. He seemed to sense that his time of unchecked power was coming to an end, and he was determined to claim what he believed was his before I could escape. The tension was unbearable. I was a ticking time bomb, counting down the days until my freedom, but terrified that the bomb would detonate before I reached zero. I knew I had to accelerate the plan. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront them not with tears and accusations, but with the cold, hard truth of their crimes, and I had to do it in a way that would ensure they could never hurt me, or Monica, ever again. The opportunity came on a Sunday evening, after one of my mother's strained, performative family dinners. Tyler, emboldened by a few beers, and his usual arrogance, started taunting me about my college applications.
"Still hoping to get out of here, Maggie?" he sneered. "Who do you think you are? You're nothing without this family." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I did not look away. "I am everything you will never be, Tyler," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I am honest, I am kind, and I am free." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Free? You're trapped here just like Mom, just like Grandma. It's our legacy." That was my opening. I pulled the small tape recorder from my pocket and placed it on the table between us. I pressed play. The sound of his own voice, whispering those terrible words from years ago, "You're next," filled the silent room. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tyler's face went white. The game was finally, irreversibly over. The silence that followed the playing of the tape was absolute, suffocating. My mother stared at the small recorder, as if it were a venomous snake, her face a mixture of horror and disbelief. Tyler, for the first time in his life, was speechless. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal panic. "What is that?" my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "That is the truth, Mom," I said, my voice steady and strong, amplified by the years of suppressed rage that were finally finding their relief. "That is the sound of your perfect son, threatening me. That is the sound of the legacy you have so carefully protected." Tyler finally found his voice. "She's lying," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She edited that. It's a fake." But I was prepared. I pulled out my notebook, the meticulous record of years of abuse, and I slid it across the table to my mother. "It's all in here, Mom," I said. "Dates, times, witnesses, every bruise on Monica, every threat he made, every time you told me to stop lying and do the dishes." My mother picked up the notebook with trembling hands. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the damning details of her own complicity. Her face crumpled, the carefully constructed mask of denial finally shattering. "Tyler," she whispered, looking at her son as if seeing him for the first time. "How could you?" He turned on her, his face contorted in a snarl. "Don't you dare blame me," he shouted. "You knew, you always knew, you just didn't want to see it. You were too busy protecting your precious reputation." Their facade of family unity crumbled in an instant, replaced by a vicious, desperate scramble for self-preservation. They turned on each other, a torrent of accusations and recriminations pouring out, a lifetime of buried secrets and resentments exploding into the open. I stood there, a silent witness to the implosion of my family, and I felt nothing but a cold, cleansing relief. It was at that moment that the doorbell rang. They both froze, their eyes wide with a new kind of terror. They knew. I walked to the door and opened. Standing on the porch were two police officers and Sarah, the social worker Mrs. Gable had contacted weeks ago. "We've received a report of child abuse at this address," one of the officers said, his voice calm and professional. I stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. "I'm glad you're here," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. "I have evidence for you." The scene that followed was a chaotic blur of flashing lights, shouted denials, and the satisfying click of handcuffs. My father, who had arrived home in the middle of the chaos, was arrested along with Tyler. My mother, hysterical and sobbing, was taken in for questioning. Monica, who had emerged from her room at the sound of the commotion, stood in the hallway, her face a mixture of terror and relief. I walked over to her and took her hand. "It's over," I whispered. "We're safe now." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. We watched as our parents and our brother were led out of the house, their reign of terror finally, definitively, and the house, which had been a prison for so long, was suddenly just a building, a crime scene, a place we would never have to return to. We were free. The legal battle that followed was long and brutal, a public airing of the secrets our family had kept buried for generations. The evidence we had gathered, the tape recordings, my notebook, Monica's medical records, and our combined testimony was overwhelming. My mother, faced with the undeniable truth of her complicity, eventually pleaded guilty to charges of child endangerment and obstruction of justice. She received a sentence that felt both too short and infinitely long. She was stripped of her parental rights, her reputation in the community shattered. The queen of denial had been dethroned. Tyler, my brother, the golden boy, fought the charges with a vicious desperation that only served to reveal the depths of his monstrousness. His lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive, manipulative liar, but the jury saw through the facade. They saw the terror in Monica's eyes as she testified. They heard the chilling certainty in my voice as I recounted years of psychological torture. He was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to a significant term in prison. My father, the patriarch of our broken dynasty, was the last to fall. His trial was the most difficult. He used his charm, his status in the community, to try and discredit us. He painted himself as a loving father who had been betrayed by his unstable daughters. But the truth, once unleashed, is a powerful. He too was convicted, sentenced to a term that would ensure he would spend the rest of his meaningful years behind bars. The house,
the scene of so many horrors, was sold. The proceeds were placed in a trust for me and Monica, a financial restitution that could never compensate for the emotional scars we carried, but that would give us the means to build a new life. The poetic justice was not lost on me. The home they had built on a foundation of our suffering had become the source of our liberation. Monica and I, now legally emancipated, moved into a small apartment together. It was a tiny, cramped space, but it was safe. It was ours. We began the slow, difficult process of healing. We went to therapy, together and separately. We learned to talk about the things that had been unspeakable for so long. We learned to laugh again, to trust again, to breathe air that was not poisoned by fear. It was not an easy journey. There were days when the darkness threatened to swallow us whole, but we had each other. We were survivors, two soldiers who had fought a long and brutal war, and had emerged, scarred but victorious, on the other side. We had not just escaped our prison, we had burned it to the ground. I sit now in the quiet, sun-drenched living room of my own home in Chicago, a city far from the ghosts of my Houston past. It is a small, peaceful space, filled with books and plants, and the gentle, comforting presence of a life I built myself. I am a successful financial analyst, a woman who understands the power of numbers, the importance of careful planning, and the value of independence. My sister, Monica, is a brilliant and formidable lawyer, a fierce advocate for abused and neglected children. She is the hero we never had, the protector we so desperately needed. We are close, she and I, bound by a bond that was forged in the fires of a shared trauma. We are not just sisters, we are comrades in arms, survivors of a war that no one else can fully understand. We rarely speak of our parents. They are shadows in our past, reminders of a darkness we have long since left behind. My mother served her time and was released, a broken, bitter woman who lives alone in a small apartment, her perfect life shattered beyond repair. We have not seen her in years.
Tyler is still in prison. He writes letters sometimes, rambling, self-pitying diatribes, filled with excuses and blame. We do not read them. They are returned to sender unopened, a silent final rejection of the poison he represents. My grandfather's legacy, the cycle of abuse that had threatened to consume us all, ended with us. We broke the chain. We chose a different path. My story is not a happy one. It is a story of profound and unimaginable betrayal. It is a story of a childhood lost to fear and silence, but it is also a story of resilience, of survival, of the quiet, unshakable power of the truth. It is a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of places, a spark of hope can ignite a fire that burns away the shadow. I often think about that little girl, the one frozen in terror in the hallway of her Cincinnati home, a whispered threat echoing in her ears. I wish I could go back and tell her that she would be okay. I wish I could tell her that her fear would one day become her courage, that her silence would one day find its voice, that her pain would one day become her purpose. I wish I could tell her that the monsters do not always win, that sometimes the quiet girl with the book in her hand is the one who grows up to slay the dragons, and that in the end, the truth, however painful, however buried, will always, eventually find its way to the light.